Well, thanks very much for the invitation. I've been in the legislature, I think this is my 23rd year, and I think this, how many years have we been doing this? Who would know? 25 years, so almost as long as well, a little bit longer than I've been here actually, and I think I participated in every single one of these, sometimes outside, sometimes inside, sometimes in the cold, sometimes in the hot, sometimes when there was a rock concert going on once in the park, I think you might remember that. But it is such an important tradition that each and every year, members of the legislature, and now through the beauty of CTN, all of our fellow citizens can be reminded of the importance of crime victims' rights in the criminal justice system. You know, many people have pointed out that in the bad old days, victims were literally ignored in the courtrooms, and I think it's fair to say that for a long time they were ignored here at the state capitol. The good news is that has been changing, slowly but surely, due to the efforts of survivors of homicide and Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence and CONSACS and Mothers Against Drunk Driving and so many other advocates who have been here day after day at the Capitol without high-priced lobbyists making a difference on a day-to-day basis. I think it's also very fitting here that there's one other person present who, as a rank-and-file legislator, as the majority leader of the House of Representatives, and as Speaker of the House, fought long and hard, especially in the area of sexual abuse of children, to change the laws, to change the attitudes, and just as important as anything else, to make sure the money was always there to provide services to victims of crime, and in particular victims of sexual abuse. I know you'll hear from Jim Amon in a minute, but he was and continues to be a great fighter for all these causes. Today I just wanted to mention two specific bills. The first one has already been mentioned twice. It could not be any more important. It's easy for this to get lost in the shuffle at the Capitol. We're talking about a technical change in the current state law that governs the Crime Victim Compensation Fund. As you heard described already, the current law basically says that although all of this money basically comes from criminal defendants who are paying fines and fees in court, none of it comes from taxpayers. All of this money is theoretically earmarked for crime victims. But under the current rule, it has to be appropriated year by year by the legislature. And in recent years, even though there was a huge surplus in this fund, the amount that could be actually paid out to crime victims was limited by the amount that the legislature had authorized to be spent. And today, when there's a big budget deficit, since there's a surplus in this fund, it's so tempting for legislators and the governor to reach in and grab some of that money and use it to balance the budget. Well, that's wrong. That's not what this money is intended for. And although the governor put it in her budget and the Appropriations Committee recommended that money be taken out of this fund in their budget as well, the Judiciary Committee, which I'm honored to chair, has sent out another bill, you've heard it mentioned, which basically says that that money is dedicated exclusively to crime victims, and it's not limited in terms of the payouts by a budget that would be passed on a year-to-year basis. This would simply change the rule to say that all of this money is available all of the time to help pay crime victims. So if they're running short at the end of a year, they can reach into the surplus of the fund to pay crime victims, but not to balance the state budget. And so that bill is on the House calendar now. Hopefully we'll be able to vote on it shortly. Hopefully it'll pass in the Senate and the governor will sign it into law, and that will resolve this problem once and for all. We foresee that if we don't reach in and grab some of this money, there'll always be a surplus. There will always be money there to pay the necessary medical expenses of victims of crime, to pay for funerals in the case of homicide victims, etc. I mean, that's what this money is for. It's not taxpayer money, one more time. This is money paid by convicted criminals to compensate victims for the costs of their own victimization. The second bill I wanted to mention is something that's easier for people not to understand, but it is extremely important. And this arises because our freedom of information laws basically say that information in police files becomes public information once a case is resolved and there's a conviction. This came to our attention last year in a couple of cases. There's a case down in New Haven where apparently there's a video of a killing, a murder, and some of the news media are trying to get that released under the Freedom of Information laws. And also Dr. Pettit pointed out that he found out after the fact that some of the information related to the incident that happened at his house, not the actual criminal case, but I think it was the 911 tapes and things like that, had been released to the public, and he found out about it by watching it on TV and reading about it in the newspaper. And he pointed out, and I agree 100%, that that should probably not happen at all, but if it's going to happen at all, victims should be notified up front, should have an opportunity to object, should have the right to go to a hearing and say why they feel that it's not right to release this type of information. Many of you are involved in the survivors of homicide, and all of you have had criminal cases involving the murderers in your case. And most of those cases, fortunately, are resolved and those guys are convicted. But theoretically, everything in those files is public information now. The autopsy photos, the crime scene photos, all of those things. And so the bill we have simply makes a change in the Freedom of Information laws to say that the police or any public official who has access to information where they know there's a crime victim, if they get a request from the newspapers or the TV stations to release information that would be considered public, they're not to release it. They're to notify the people who are asking for it that they're not going to release it. And if the people, typically it would be a newspaper reporter or something, want to get it released, they have to go to the FOI Commission, and the victim would be notified, and the FOI Commission would have to decide, does the public's right to know outweigh the legitimate interests in privacy that the crime victim's family has? Right now, there's no such hearing, there's no such notification, it's automatic. You and I have fought this battle over 20 years to ensure notification of victims, giving them a say in the process. We're not saying that under no circumstances can any information ever be released. We're simply saying you have a right to object, you have a right to know what's happening, you have a right to be heard, and there has to be a determination that the public's right to know outweighs the victim's interest in privacy. This was suggested by our new crime advocate, Michelle Cruz, and who was ably assisted by Merritt LaJoy, one of my favorites, right? It was the veteran in the office, Merritt's the newcomer. But you know, in Massachusetts and in many states, Michelle comes from Massachusetts, she was a prosecutor up there, this is standard operating procedure. It's just common sense. Now, there's opposition to this, you should know. It comes from the news media, and I had a long argument on the phone yesterday with a reporter, and they have some valid points. It's a free country, we want to have transparent government. Sometimes there's abuses in the system that they have a right to know about.